Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. I want to introduce you all to a roguelike that's terrible, but in all the best ways. A game that's so great at fulfilling its niche that my friend who I could convince to play it dropped it in about 5 minutes. And that game is... So I was thinking for a while on how to best review a game that has so many different aspects of what makes it tick, and how those different aspects of this game all fit together to make a clock that's completely broken, but whenever you look at it, it miraculously tells the right time. So the best way to do this, in my opinion, is through the totally not overused format of a numbered list. Also, be warned that this will be a somewhat complete dissection of the game, hence spoiler warning right now if you're interested in playing it for yourself. Although, to be honest, even if it is spoiled, it's still worth playing in my opinion. So let's start with number 1, level design. So, the vast majority of roguelikes, whilst being touted as having random levels, they are actually far from it, because with most of these dungeon crawler / shooter roguelikes, The Binding of Isaac and Enter the Gungeon come to mind as prime examples of this, because they're actually just a bunch of pre-made rooms that are all thrown together randomly. So it isn't really random if the rooms are pre-made and are the exact same each time you approach them. In fact, your approach to these rooms stays pretty much the same every single time. For example, this room with the bomb puzzle where you have to figure out what you're supposed to do the first few times, it's pretty fun. But after that, it just feels like a chore with literally no danger. And while this problem is less severe in rooms with combat, it is still present, as you're noticing yourself getting more and more, well, quite frankly bored as your brain starts to remember what to do each time, and the rooms just become basic algorithm processes rather than, fun. In fact, you see this repeated in many seemingly more open roguelikes like Atomic Crops, because while they seem completely open, you'll start to notice the same patterns of enemies that are guarding items, or the same fucking broken down car with the same few enemies near it, over and over and over again. So it's here where Nuclear Throne differs from its competitors, as it utilised presets much less. Not saying that it doesn't use them at all, because I don't know if it does or if it doesn't, but if it does, then it is not noticeable at all. Now, you might think I'd love this, right? More variety on each floor, less boredom, you have to think more about how you approach things? Sounds great, right? Well, there's actually a reason why most roguelikes are made with presets, and that is to make sure that they're actually fucking fair. Because in Isaac, and pretty much every other roguelike under the sun, every room is designed specifically to be able to be beaten, at least if you were skilled enough, with nothing but the base stats and no upgrades. Just to be sure that if you got absolutely screwed by random generation in the item room, you could still win with enough skill. But with Nuclear Throne, while it can be perfectly fine and dandy, other times you will just get complete fucking bullshit floor generation, where sometimes you can be blocked in with your only choice being to push out into a large open hallway where you can just get immediately cock-stomped and you literally cannot see the enemies that are shooting at you until their bullets have rammed themselves halfway down your esophagus. Number 2. Progression. This game's progression, as with most roguelikes, is split into the progression that you have in the run that resets after your run, and the progress that you make in the run that stays after the run. For example, unlocking a new character by doing something in a run, well, you can then use that character in other runs. So first, let's talk about number 2.25, run progression. So first off, I think that the levels themselves that you progress through are quite good. Level 1 is your typical starter level. The enemies here are quite predictable, but also offer a good challenge, with the large maggots being able to flank you at a moment's notice, and the occasional champion scorpion giving you a minor stroke pretty much every time you see them. Also, the boss here is called Big Bandit, and despite being easy, he will occasionally steamroll you because he can just ram through walls. And if you don't notice him, and he's mid-ram, then it's an insta-kill. No questions, no takesies backsies. Next up is the sewers, with enemies that charge you more than the previous, but it's still pretty easy with a decent amount of challenge. Next up is a scrapyard, and it's at this point where things can start to get pretty funky. Snipers who can shoot you from all the way across the map, and birds who can quickly fly up, flank you, and shoot you really quickly. Basically like if you put those maggots from earlier on steroids, speed, and crack cocaine. Also, while these guys can be in the sewers, here they're far more common. They're purple dudes who do insane melee damage, play dead, and move like Roadrunner mid-meep. This boss here is Big Dog, and despite looking intimidating as all hell, and having tons of health, he's usually quite the pushover. Next up are the Crystal Caves. Oh joy! Okay, well, to be fair, it isn't too bad, but the crystal spiders move really erratically, so fighting them close is like pulling teeth. And if you accidentally walk into one of the laser crystals, go directly to fucking jail, do not pass go, because apparently a very slowly rotating crystal is enough to immediately insta-kill you no matter what your health is. Now, if the game up to this point is like being at a party slowly drinking your beers, then Zone 5 is after an hour in, and the amount of drunkenness you thought you were just got thrown out of the window because now the alcohol has actually goddamn kicked in. Enemies leap around trying to claw at you, massive robots shoot missiles, and an amount of bullets that seem almost at parody. And they also have these really bloody annoying noises when they get shot. Definitely the steepest difficulty increase in the game by far. But there's this one little malformed spud nozzle I'll name Lil Hunter. Oh my lord, this guy is by far the most completely random and stupid injection of difficulty. He just flies down, wrecks house, refuses to elaborate, and then fucks off again.
We're having a moment here! Lock down! Lock down! Lock down!
Oh, and also, just to add to how annoying he is, if you manage to put down the sod, he starts spiraling around, and then after a little bit, he'll just explode, killing you if you're close. And yes, this has happened to me multiple times. So yeah, forgive me if I'm just a little bit salty about this guy. And for those of you in the comments who may be furiously typing "get good" or some other variety of such, most players of the game completely despise this guy. Although you can definitely tell when you reach the people who play games a bit too much when they start saying that he's actually super easy if you just learn the attack pattern. Next up is the labs, with sentry turrets, necromancers, plants, and crystal boys. Nothing negative to say here, it can be pretty hard, but isn't unfair if you're paying attention, and is my favourite level by far in terms of atmosphere and enemy design and things like that. Next up is the palace, which is the final set of floors. Here, the interdimensional police department come by in full force. Them, in combination with tons of new enemies who shoot tons of circles of bullets, make it hard as hell. My best advice is to just keep your trigger down, pretty much all the time. There are enough enemies here that you'll almost certainly be hitting something, and the final boss here is the throne. The nuclear throne? This guy is a pretty decent boss, intimidating as all hell, good attacks, and is pretty fair all things considered. 10 out of 10, no real complaints. So, with all this talk about how the level progression is mostly, keyword mostly, good with increasing difficulty, you'd think that I loved the run progression. Well, the thing about that is, to add to this though, your gun quality varies way too much between runs, because sometimes you'll get legitimate hyper rifles and automatic crossbows on level 3-3, and other times you'll not get guns that good until the throne. I mean, listen, I get it right. Roguelikes will have different power levels per run. That's a given, and that's honestly what makes them more fun than a lot of other games. But sometimes the ability to kill things quickly is a straight up requirement to avoid getting crumped on. For example, in the little hunter floor, you need to run around and shoot all the enemies near you so that you can concentrate on Lil Hunter. But if you can't do that in time, then you're going to have a way harder time. Next up, the mutation system. Basically, if you kill an enemy, you get rads. You get enough rads to fill up this canister, then you level up. Then, at the end of the level where you leveled up, you get to pick one mutation out of the 4 choices. Personally, I really like this system in principle, because it's both random, but also allows you to think tactically about your choices. Slight problem here though, the mutations are balanced horribly. In fact, I don't think they were even balanced at all, to be honest. For example, would you rather just get a full heal and some ammo, or would you rather heal 4 health from every single medkit rather than the measly 2? Meaning that if you were on 1 health, you could fully heal yourself with just 2 medkits, provided you had 8 max health, as most characters do. To carry on from this, would you rather deal damage to everyone else when you get hit, but you can't take that many hits anyway, so it's not like you can do a Thorns build or anything, or would you rather get +4 maximum health? Now, this would make sense if you could take unlimited mutations, as it'd be okay if some mutations were just meant for immediate, oh my god, I'm about to die, please help me situations, if you could take infinite mutations, because you could then work to get the ones that benefited you later after you'd gotten off death row. But no, you can only take 8. Well, 8 of the ones that work like this. There is a bonus one we'll get into later, but for now, just 8. So it makes no sense to waste 12.5% of your mutations on a full heal. Hell, you might as well just take the chance and hope you don't die, because if you don't die, then your run will be way less powerful, and if you do die, it doesn't really take that long to get back up to where you were. So, oh well. Both of these issues compound themselves when you remember that the game's progression isn't exactly the best. So you could be walking into World 5 with just a basic machine gun, a crossbow, getting absolutely demolished by the locals, and you just need to hope and pray that something decent drops. And if you haven't gotten good mutations before this, well then you're completely fucked. Furthermore, that extra mutation I spoke about is a character-specific mutation, where you get a choice of 2 things, and these are incredibly powerful. I have no problem with these. They're a cool mechanic that adds a lot of depth to the game and increases replay value. Speaking of replaying the game, one of the developers thought about that and said, "Yeah, that's cool, but I can't be bothered going back to the menu. Can't we just keep going from there?" in his perfect Dutch accent. But then the other developer said, "I should, but I already made the teaser cutscene for the other ending." And then his feelings were hurt. He began to cry, as the Dutch tended to do. Fuck, I just can't help bullying mainland Europe. Nigel Farage will be very proud, I'm sure. But regardless, if you shoot all 4 of these generator type thingies, and then you spark out the boss, another portal opens, and you get to fight yet another boss. And then after them, you go right back to the start of the game. But with a few differences. Tell you what, I'm going to play a bit from level 1-1. And then a bit from 1-1 after looping. So, as you can notice, that's a little bit nutty. Though I would argue that it can also just become a nice big long seizure of gun noises, and then it ends in about 5 seconds. But what was that monument for? Well, my good straw man, it was for something called crowns. What are crowns? Why, I'm so glad you asked. Well, They're basically modifiers that modify the rest of the run, as modifiers tend to do, though you can swap them for another crown later if you realise that you cocked up in your first choice. And again, these really help to shake up the gameplay each run, and they actually help you apply a bit of strategy. For example, this crown lets you take an extra mutation, but all the mutations you get after that, you can only choose from one, rather than the normal 4. So you ideally want to pick this crown when you have as few mutations as possible to choose, so that way you've had more total choices. I hope that makes sense. So, we've spoken about run progression. Now let's talk about number 2.5, long-term game progression. I would categorise this as progression that you make in your runs that impacts future runs. For example, unlocking a new character by reaching a certain floor. Though I'll only be talking about how the characters are unlocked here. How the characters actually function I'll get into a bit later. This game's long-term progression is certainly lacking compared to other roguelikes like Isaac or Gungeon. Not necessarily a bad thing, as some people prefer these elements to be smaller or completely gone. Personally, I prefer more long-term progression, but hey, I'll leave that decision up to you. But regardless, what is this game's long-term progression? Well, first off, there's characters, as mentioned before. Most of them are basically reach X area or kill X thing. And then there's horror. So, to unlock him, you know those canisters that you used to level up? Yeah, well, you ignore them. Not once, but twice. And then this little radiation doggo shows up, who goes... And then you kill that, and then you get the character. Is this explained by the game? Nope. Yeah, get used to the game not telling you shit. It'll get worse. A whole fucking lot worse. Next up, there are golden guns, which you can unlock by getting a screwdriver and then taking it to this one funky looking car and then hitting it with a screwdriver. Then you can go into Young Venus's mansion. Who's Young Venus? Well, he's a rapping triangle who wants to get verified. You know what? Saying this stuff out loud really makes me realise how stupendously silly this game is. But regardless, you go there, pick up the weapon in the golden chest, then you take it to the end of the level and you go through the portal, and then bish bash bosh, that's now an alternate starting weapon for your character. That, or you can find a golden weapon after looping, but looping is quite difficult, so generally most people's golden weapon will be through the screwdriver car method. Now, I've got to be honest, I really don't like this system, because so many times I see a golden weapon that would have really helped me out, but I don't want to take it because it's worse than my alternate starting weapon. And I don't see why, once you unlock golden weapon for a character, you can't switch between the guns that you've unlocked for them, so that then I could actually take the guns I needed at a particular moment. There are also B skins which are exactly what they sound like. Some of these are as hard as balls to unlock, but none are really unfair per se. There are also crowns. Again, hello there. Basically, if you loop or sit on the throne while holding a crown, then you unlock it for that character. So you can start the run with that crown immediately for that character. So yeah, as you can see, this game's long-term progression is pretty damn limited compared to the Binding of Isaac, which has characters, alternate versions of those characters, new items, new modes, and new upgrades for those characters, and new alternate floors, and probably a bunch of other stuff I'm forgetting. Oh, and new bosses, of course. Now, it's time for part 2 3/4. So, secrets. They tend to keep games interesting, and they can provide good ways for more dedicated players to find cool things if there are clues there. Or hell, sometimes there don't even need to be any clues, if it's just something dumb, like the developers referencing a show they like in a random room. And again, it's okay for this to only be able to be found by chance, if, and only if, there are no gameplay advantages for finding this, and it really is just a quirky little Easter egg. Nuclear Throne, however, does not follow this principle, much to its detriment in my opinion. For example, you want to go to the secret Oasis floor to skip all the way up to 3-3 from the desert. Well, no problem. All you have to do is take the radiation canister, ammo chest and weapon chest without killing any enemies. Really quickly, might I add. Then Big Bandit spawns in. Then you can kill him. Then you can go to the cool fish floor. So I hope that this shows that, hey, maybe it isn't the best idea to hide massive parts of your game behind bullshit things that people wouldn't think to do, like, oh, I don't know, not shooting people in the Shooty Bang Bang game? Also, pretty much all of the secret floors are this bullshit to find. Besides the floors which give you the crowns, they're pretty easy to find. And I suppose you could put an exception here to the crystal caves, and maybe, just maybe the jungle. I personally wouldn't make the jungle an exception, but hey, you could argue it is. Oh, but my friends! We haven't even talked about the secret characters. Well, let's get into that shit show, shall we? So, there are two secret characters, the frog and the skeleton. So, to unlock the skeleton, well, to play as a skeleton is you can't actually unlock him on the character select screen, but regardless, to play as a skeleton, you need to play as Melting, get to the lab level, then, when the necromancer spawns in his big circle, you must die inside of said big purple circle. Then, and only then, can you play as a skeleton. Again, how in the fuck are you supposed to figure this out? Next up is the frog. Oh boy, this one's a real doozy. So, first off, you need to loop. Then get to the sewers. Then, you need to shoot the boss that's there at least once with a golden gun. This will make it drop a frog pistol. You then have to keep hold of said frog pistol and then put it into the proto chest that's in crown rooms after you've already been in a crown altar because they don't show up the first time you go in one. Then you go back to said proto chest on a different run and now it's the golden frog pistol. Then you exit the portal with it and bing bang boing, your alternate start gun for that character will now be the golden frog pistol. And then, if you start with this alternate gun, then finally, can you play as the golden frog? Now, let me ask you, oh gracious viewer, how in the ever-living hell is someone supposed to figure that out on their own, without a Wikipedia? That is completely ridiculous. I'm sorry, but it just plain is. And hey, I can respect games with brutally hard difficulty. I love the feeling of finally breaking a challenge down. I mean, hell, despite the fact that I've played far too many video games for someone my age, I am still by far the worst at them in my friend group. I only bring this up because I don't want to come across as one of those people who are like, ugh, I'm just so good at video games. Super hard ones are the only way I can feel somewhat challenged. Like, no, I acknowledge I'm dog shit, but I still like the immense challenge. I just feel like there's a difference between difficult and stupid. Number 3, the true ending. Now, while this probably could have gone into the previous section, this annoys me so much and is so emblematic of the struggles that this game faces, I just need to give it its own section, because it annoyed me so much. So, basically, if you beat the game and don't loop, so you just sit on the throne, this cutscene plays. So, obviously, this makes you think, there's more going on here, isn't there? And yes, there is. There's a true ending. But to get to it, you need to trudge through some right royal Ocean's 11 style bullcronk. Basically, after the loop these police vans spawn in that bring out tons of IDPD, and kill you if you run into them while they're moving. But you're supposed to press X on the van in the very small window of time when it's braking and has its blue stoplights on, and then, and only then, can you go to the true ending floor. Sorry. Excuse me, what is this? I'm sorry, it reads almost like a parody of video game secrets. Again, why lock off such an incredibly large part of your game, the true ending of your game, to some specific random bullshit that nobody would think to do in a million years if it wasn't printed black and white on a wiki? It's ridiculous. And the true ending is really cool. You get to bust into the IGPD headquarters and start wrecking house. But if you don't use a wiki or research on YouTube, you will never know about this. Now let's talk about number 3.5. There's not that much here, so I don't want to commit a number to it. So 3.5, the characters. Characters in a good roguelike, in my opinion, should either be relatively similar in power levels or should be challenged characters. Nuclear Throne follows this somewhat, besides eyes. His passive is crap and his active is crap. I have nothing else to say here, I just think eyes is dumb. Well, alright guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you all enjoyed it, because in gathering the footage for this video, my hairline's gone back at least a centimetre or so. So, have a nice night, chums and chumettes. I'll see you later. I still need to work on that video I promised at a community poll about 6 months ago, or however long ago it was now. So yeah, I'll get on that. Have a nice night.